Now, before we start, just a quick introduction to what these talks are. So this is the Unplugged live talk series by Matra. The idea being that we want to talk to people and creative individuals, but instead of talking about their projects and instead of looking at their portfolios, we want to actually know what the story is behind them and what makes them tick. So when I was talking with Viren and we were talking about who we can bring, of course, one of the first thoughts and first names that popped in our minds was Ambrish, who's had a glorious journey. I'm going to quickly read out a brief introduction for him. He is, as we all know, the founder of the internationally acclaimed multi-award-winning design practice, studiolotus, and his journey spans over 3 decades. A little hard to tell, but it also excludes extraordinary experiences, which range from being a motorcycle mechanic to repairing computers, building boats, teaching in schools, working on films, and culminating in designing interiors, buildings, as well as furniture. He has an interesting past, and even though he's most known as an architect and designer, it might be a surprise to some to know that he's not technically trained as an architect and designer, but he brings all his flourish to his practice. His current focus is mentoring 3 creative enterprises by enabling conscious leadership as a catalyst to meaningful growth. His personal nourishment comes from training as an amateur triathlete, taking surfing holidays with his family, and deepening his spiritual practice. So there's a lot that goes behind creating what studiolotus is. There is a lot that goes behind what we know Ambrish as this creative genius. And today we hope to unearth a little bit of that. So to begin with, welcome Ambrish to our talk.
Hi guys. Hello. Thank you, Mrinalini. That all sounded much more glamorous than it is, but I'm going to take it all in. Thank you.
Of course, you must. So since, I've already introduced you as somebody who's had a very colorful journey and history into the design field, do you want to just kind of walk us through what it's been like and what are the various things that you've done? Because the idea of today's chat is also to look at some of our personal journeys and some of our personal experiences and those things that actually inform what we do and why we do them today.
So I'm going to briefly, go back. I'm going to rewind all the way back to my childhood. I'm going to make the most of this and use this as an opportunity to really, I think, talk about the most profound impact, one of the people who had the most profound impact on my life was my father, who was a highly eccentric man, and he had his own set of values and his own way of looking at the world. And he really believed that every person should be able to do everything, and there's nothing that can't be figured out. So I grew up in a house where, and COVID is very relevant, we would wash our clothes, we would sweep and swab the floor. Everything was repaired within the house. My father would open anything up. Very often we had a whole bunch of opened up gadgets lying around the house, not fixed. But he believed that everything could be figured out. And the second thing I grew up with was this immense kind of belief in that because everything can be figured out, you can do anything you want in your life. I don't think it reflected through my school days. I was a very average, slightly above average student. School was painful for me. I went, my schooling education was 14 schools. A lot of people ask, how did that happen? I don't know really. I say it's my father was in the Navy. But, my sister was with me and she went to 6 schools, but I went to 14. So I'd like to say that I was thrown out of every school every year, but that's not true either.
That's another story to hear.
So I think by the time I was through with school and I entered college, and I was in my first year of marine engineering in Bombay. And within the first 2 or 3 months, I had a run-in. I thought that would be my freedom from this whole rigid structure, and I would really get to learn something that was of value to me. And I had a run-in with one of my professors, and one thing led to another, and I called my dad saying, look, I don't want to study anymore. And he said, look, it's up to you. He had retired from the Navy, and He was a school teacher. He was one of those, true Deshbhakt, very Gandhian. Even though he was highly qualified, double PhD, and he had offers to teach in American universities, he wanted to stay back and teach children. So he became a school teacher. And he said, look, I can pay for your college education in India, but if you want to be on your own and you're not a graduate, you need to figure out what you want to do with your life. And so I think that was my first big decision where I said, look, I will figure it out as things go along. And I dropped out of college. I did a bunch of odd jobs, and along the way, at some point, my father, and those jobs were largely to support myself, and my father started he was disillusioned with the school system, so he started a little enterprise making boats. That was in Noida. It was a small shed at 1,500 rupees rent. That the shed was about 1,000 square feet, and he was a retired naval officer, so he got an order to make a lifeboat which was bigger than the shed we were in. So for 6 months, so he called me back. He said, how much money are you making? At that time I was making about 1,500 rupees a month. Or he said, look, I'll pay you 1,600 and you come back. And I came back to Delhi, and I pretty much started working as a carpenter, welder, molder, fiberglass molder, basically learning on the job along with a couple of other workers. And I didn't end up going to college, and I didn't end up having the regular experiences of having a bunch of college friends and hanging out and any form of education, forget architecture, design. So my education was really working with my hands and learning how to make a living. And at one part of the journey, I was joined by a dear friend who was my father was a local guardian. He was studying in St. Stephen's College. I would go hang out with him, and through him, I would get my experience, a distant experience of some kind of what college life is about. So it was quite unusual because, when I met friends, when I tried to kind of get introduced to girls, and they would ask, say, what do you do? And I would say, I work in a factory, and they thought, okay, I had a business, but I would cycle 14 kilometers to take a DTC bus because we had no money. We were living hand to mouth. So very quickly it all got de-glamorized. And so I think for me, coming to terms with what life held and what life was about was really about figuring things out ongoingly and dealing with situations as they emerged on an everyday basis. And I think that somehow one thing led to another. After a few years of helping my father stabilize his business, I moved out, and my sister in the meantime was studying architecture. And I ended up, I used to go hang out in a college. That was my only way to meet girls. And I would go for the Navratras and the Dandiya time and, try and, get whatever fun times I could. And I think at that time I got and her friend at the time, her senior, saw what I was doing, and he said, look, why don't you study industrial design? And I put together a portfolio. By that time I was working a lot with wood. I really enjoyed timber and metal, and I had started making some products and some side experiments in the factory. And I put together a portfolio, and I went with my portfolio to NID. I was about 23 by the time. So I'd worked for 5-6 years. In between, I had taken short breaks and gone and taught in schools. That's another story, which I'm not going to get into. But so by this time, I thought I wanted to go back and study. And so I made this portfolio, and I went to NID, and I met a couple of professors who told me, you're overage for the school leaving course, and you're underqualified for the postgrad course, and there's no way you'll get admission into an institute like this. And sure enough, my application form was rejected. It wasn't even didn't even make it past the first round. And I think I got the first sensible piece of advice by a lot of you might have heard of the late MP Ranjan. He was really, a guide to many and a mentor to many. And I had the good fortune of meeting him. And he said, look, why don't you just forget about this? You've worked with your hands. you've got this incredible repository of skill, and just go and, intern with a design firm. And I joined a firm called Oriole Design, led by Amardeep Behel and Ajoy David at the time. They were at the India Habitat Center. And I came with my little portfolio, and I met Amar, and I said, look, I've got this. And he said, what do you want to do? I mean, so I said, I just want to work. And he said, but do you know how to work in this space? And I said, no, but I'll give it everything I've got. And I said, you just pay me whatever you're paying, your least paid employee, and whatever it was, I don't remember, about 1,500 rupees at the time, what an intern was at, or a draftsman was at that. It was 1993, I think, was the year. And and then I started work there, and I really gave it my heart and soul. I had a brief stint with a French architect who was in the office across, who had come to do an office in the India Habitat Center. I was loaned out there as cheap labor, and I would go Xerox his drawings and buy his cigarettes and beedies and work 16-hour days. And I used to make all my drawings. He told me to get involved in furniture, and the only way I knew how to draw was 1:1. So all my drawings were measured out, on 1:1. I distinctly remember that. So I would take 3 days to do a drawing for one table. But it was a fantastic experience. We made a lot of furniture in carbon fiber, aluminium. At that time, it was all very high tech. And I had worked with a bit of fiberglass and carbon fiber when we were doing our boats. So that became, we went to HAL, Hindustan Aeronautics. We got some prototypes developed. It was a very exciting phase. And I was learning, really. I was soaking it all in. Amar and Ajoy and the rest of the team, they were fantastic guides. They gave me a lot of opportunity. And I think within three or 4 years, I was an associate in the firm. It was a huge learning and huge opportunity for me. And subsequently, Amar and I, we branched off on our own, and we set up Design Habit. That's a firm that Amar continues to head, which would specialize in museums and exhibition design. And I did that for several years along with him. We helped set up Rajiv Sethi's studio on his comeback. His first project was the expo in Hanover that he, after Aditi and all of that, then, and we helped set up his founding studio, which for the first year of the project. That's where I got engaged with cinema through Amar's friends. So there were a couple of his friends, Rajan Khosa and Nalin Pandya. I worked on 2 films. On one, started off in art and ended up being production manager. On the other one, again, started off in art and production design and ending up being a line producer. That was entirely shot in Ladakh. It was a film called Samsara, where I was involved for about a year. So and then after that experience, when I came back, I had an opportunity to design an office for a friend, and we did that as a team in Design Habit. By the time Ankur and Siddharth, who are my partners now in Lotus, had joined. So Ankur had joined Design Habit as an intern, and he was directly working with me on an exhibition we did. And Siddharth joined subsequently, and we worked on a couple of projects together. And I got more interested in pure spatial expression rather than spatial communication, which then led me to set up Lotus. And so I had this idea of setting up a separate studio where we only worked on space. And I immediately kind of asked people in the team, and Siddharth and Ankur especially, saying that would they like to join. They both spoke to Amar and I both, and my good fortune, they decided to come on board. And from that point on, it wasn't all hunky-dory. It was a huge struggle. I had, I think, 30,000 rupees in my bank or something like that. And I didn't have an education, and I didn't have a degree. And so we managed getting a couple of projects, which kind of saw us through paying some basic salaries. And we were about to go under after about 8 months, 9 months. We had no money left to pay anyone anything. And we got an opportunity to design a mela in Patiala, where the architect or the designers had dropped out last minute, and the clients came to us. they were Intac at the time. Intac was kind of convening that, saying, we have a crafts mela happening there. Would you design it? And we had 20 days to design and build on an 8-acre site.
Wow.
And yeah, yeah.
That's
And
insane.
yeah, but it was a fair, right? I mean, it was 20 days. So yeah, but we didn't have, I mean, it's like we were desperate, and there was an opportunity, and we were getting a handsome amount of 2 lakhs as fees. So we were absolutely thrilled to take it on. And I think Sid and Ankur parked themselves at site. I was coordinating things out of here. We worked with Batra Tent House. We used to do weddings, and it was an incredible. And even, I have to say, even within all that, within that month-long period, we managed building a very strong narrative. And so I think this whole desire to tell a story through space has been very strong the beginning. And after that, we managed getting, I don't know, a series of small projects. And our first project that got us noticed were 2 projects simultaneously. There was a small store called Via Home, which...
Sorry, before you go ahead, Siddharth says it was 1 lakh.
Okay, it was 1 lakh. Okay. Yeah. So I've got rose tinted glasses on here. So 1 second, I'm just getting my computer on charge. Yeah. Sorry. So yeah, and yeah, so we Via got us noticed. It was a small store. It was a Vikram Goyal. He was very, very kind to give us that opportunity. That led us into more retail, and we did our first F&B projects. There were 2. There was Khaja Chowk and at the F Bar in Ladossarai.
The F Bar, yeah.
In Ladossarai, where again,
so many of us have been there.
Yeah. So those were the 2 projects, I think, that brought some stability to the practice. After which, then there were a series of interior projects. Then at a certain stage, we got a house to do. The house was, again, somebody who had not seen our work, but just had heard of us, and she enjoyed meeting us. And she said, I just want to build my house. And we said, look, we've never built anything. She said, that's fine. You'll build my house. And when we started work on the house, similarly, Nikulendra, our client, we had done a museum shop in the Mehrangarh Fort by the time, our first adaptive reuse project. And the CEO of the trust, his sons had started this project in the walled city, and they said, look, will you do a hotel? And we said, look, we've not even done a house. So they said, no, but we want to work with you the way you've done the museum shop, which was all of, I think, 2,000 square feet. And this hotel was like a new build of 60,000 square feet in a very challenging environment. And they said, no, we want to work with you. I was very nervous about taking it on and using the client as a guinea pig. So I got in some friends from Bangalore, Rajiv and Gopa and Ajit, that run a practice called Praxis. So we together worked on this, and it was an amazing journey. And again, the whole narrative building continued for us, and this desire to kind of go beyond the immediate brief, I think, kept coming up as we went along in different scales, and and we've been very fortunate to have just grown very organically, continued increasing in scale and complexity of project both, and we've learned
created a very diverse set of projects and portfolio, right? Over a period of time.
Yeah. So but I don't know, whether we created it just come to us.
But I think, is that a theme that you think that you've kind of been the jack of all trades? You've been a master of quite a few yourself, and you've kind of dappled in a lot of different things, right? Do you think that at one level, the fact that you did not have a formal training in design and architecture allows you the freedom to do the things that you wanted to do and not kind of get bound within boxes and, slotted into holes?
I think anything I say will be post-rationalization, and
sure.
say, oh, that was it. I don't think the education either adds or takes away. I think what has really helped me stand my, stay true to course has been really my foundational years with my father. I think whatever education would have come, wouldn't have come, would have been a layer either over it or without it. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say, but I think to me, the things that really I find is the lack of fear before trying something out that I don't know how it's going to, so basically
you've taken the risks and the chances.
Yeah.
Right?
And it does.
And so you're not afraid of it anymore.
Yeah. No, not anymore. I mean, to me at step one, I'm not afraid of doing something that I don't know how to do. And I think that's really been for me in my personal journey a huge. In fact, that's what excites me, is to really go into territories and areas and really go deep. So it will not be for the heck of it, but it would really be trying to that there is a way to do this better. And I always believe there's a way to do anything better, or in a way that adds more value, and in a way that is more enriching. And I think that has been a constant pursuit.
Yeah. And that's something that you continue to do, right? And you're doing this like on a daily basis. You're not only, Ambrish is not only Studio Lotus. Ambrish is not only Mangrove. Ambrish is this man of many things, right? Whether it's sports or whether it's holiday. I think you're one of the few people in design professionals in the country who very rigorously takes a decided break every year at the end of the year. Or, whether it's your spiritual practice. So all these things, I'm sure they kind of tie into what your journey has been and what you continue to do on a daily basis. I think everyone's got one question in their mind, is that given this lockdown and given the times of the COVID pandemic, if I may ask, what is your regular day like? What's your schedule like?
So I think my day is pretty much like it always is. I don't think my schedule has changed much, except that
really?
Yeah. I mean,
that means you're cheating.
No, well, okay. So I'm not getting to cycle, but instead I go out for a really early morning run. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I head out at about.
Please do not try this at home. Yeah. Disclaimer.
Yeah. So I wake up around between 5:30, 5:36, depending on the day. I do my own personal exercise. So I'll run, or I'll do my yoga. I'll do whatever workout routine I have. I do my meditation practice, and then I wake up. My boys, I mean, that's really the thrilling part of this time, is that they're in boarding. I've got twin 14-year-old boys, and they are back from boarding. They're in boarding school, so they're back because of whatever's happening.
By default, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think they're thrilled because I beat them out of bed. They're out up by 7, and I've gotten them into meditation, so we meditate twice a day, and I do a high intensity workout with them in the morning before the classes. So the classes start at 9. So
basically they haven't gotten out of boarding, is what you're saying.
No, they're actually having a worse time than boarding, because the boarding they are in is completely like
definitely more chilled out than this.
It's very chilled out. So I don't think they're really thrilled at being back. But having said that, they're done with their meditation and their workout by 8:30. They have the breakfast and they're logged in, and I log in to work at about 9:30, and I have meetings pretty much through the day till about 6:30, sometimes 7. And then again, it's family time. I get to hang out with them. We read. We play some TT on a dining table. I go do some grocery shopping.
Creative innovations. Huh?
Yeah. So so that's what the day looks like. So.
But considering that you're doing this, and I know that you've been a practitioner of meditation, and you have this very strong sort of will to nourish your spiritual side. And I'm sure all these things also inform your design practice, and they inform you as a designer and as the things that you bring to the table, right?
So
do you think it would be different if you weren't doing this? Again, of course, everything's in retrospect, but
yeah. So for me, the practice is not what I do. Over the years, I've really come to understand that what gives me meaning, and to me, I think we are all in our own ways trying to give our own lives meaning. And what gives me meaning is really working in the domain of being, and really beginning to understand that my being is the source of the life I have. not even the life I have. There is no life I have. I mean, the life I have is what's happening all the time. It's more the experience of my life that I have. And my experience is a function of my self-awareness and my state of mind and my negative experience or positive experience that I get from the outside. I am the translator. So I'm the one who's making it that. And if I want to transform my experience and grow in my experience, then the source is, I am the source. So all the work needs to be done at my end. And another, I mean, I had the good fortune of reading the Patanjali Sutra very in early days and being exposed to people and thinking which really kind of helped me understand the construct, at least my own construct, and I'm still continuing to learn, but the importance of a balance between the body and the mind and the spirit, and the source of it all being the spirit, really. So to me, that is increasingly become foundational to who I am and my own experience of life. And it's no longer, I mean, to me, it's no longer doing my practice. It is the source of my life. And the practice just helps me connect deeper to my source. And I'm it's still a very long journey. I mean, it's an endless journey, and every day is a new day. But I find that this is the only thing that gives me a sense of progression and a sense of movement and a sense of real kind of fulfillment to some degree. And I believe, I mean, that's something I brought to the practice as well. I believe that a lot of people ask, why do you do what you do? And I think Studiolotus just designs and does architecture because that's what we know to do, but that's not why we exist. I think we exist because of our core values. We exist because we believe in a set of values and a way of being together. And for me, that is really each one of us being the best human beings. Not just human beings, I mean, the best design practitioners we can be, the best. So if we work together, then I am as interested in you being the best version of yourself. And I will push you, and I will demand of you, and I will work with you to kind of help that self-expression come true for you. And to me, the spiritual spiritual, emotional, and physical well-being is an integral part of that. So a lot of training and development work we do at the studio, in fact, almost all of it, is not, I mean, a lot of people find it odd, is not architectural discourse, it's not model making, it's not design-led at all. I would say the senior most, I would say the top 15, 20 people, a lot of the work we do is really on self-awareness. It's on, and I believe that if we are to make a difference to people around us and to society around us and to processes and to design process and architecture, the place to start is within us. And really that's where we work as a team. I work with people individually, and I believe that's where leadership emerges from. It's from a very high degree of self-awareness.
And I believe you also actively encourage your team to join certain practices and take certain courses in order to achieve that.
Yeah, I mean, we invest a lot of time, money, and effort in that. I believe that. So I personally benefited a lot from 2 or 3 things. One is my meditation practice. One is something called the Landmark Forum. I did the entire Landmark curriculum for living, which was transformational for me. But it's not limited to this. I mean, you could have your own practice, or you could have your own way of addressing that aspect, your aspect of self-discovery. And we pay for a lot of this for the team. We subsidize it heavily because we really believe in it, that it's transformational. And I think that's what's special about, I mean, I'm saying so myself, but I think what's really special about our practice is not the work we do. I think there are many, probably much more talented teams out there. I think what I really enjoy, why I love going into work, and why I think a lot of people love coming into work, is because of the energy we have in the studio, the way we work together, and how much we believe in what we do, and how much we believe in each other. and the way everyone nurtures each other. And I think that environment gets created only when this journey of self-discovery and self-awareness is happening for everyone. I mean, there's no, in that journey there's no hierarchy really. Everyone's at par.
So is this one of the reasons why, interestingly, I've noticed that your designation seems to be rather unusual at Studio Lotus, and you like to refer to yourself as the mentor. Any specific reason, or is this one of them? Because you do run mentorship programs.
Yeah, that's because I've left with no work in the studio. I've been thrown out. I've been thrown out of the studio now, and my colleagues have said, we don't want you around. And when are you going to get out of our hair? So I think, that's the real reason. And I can give you the made-up reason. I mean, so the real reason is really, I feel I was becoming increasingly redundant in my role as a CEO or as an executioner. I had reached a plateau. I was not being able to contribute to the level that the organization needed. I mean, what makes Studio Lotus fantastic is just the quality of team, the quality of people who lead it, the quality of people who are part of the practice, right? From the junior most to the senior most. I mean, I'm just amazed. I'm in awe of the team we have, and it's really rewarding to walk in there every day and see the passion and commitment and talent and desire to excel really out there. So I felt there was no need really for me to continue playing the role I was, and hence so the first conversation I said, okay, then should I leave? And said, no, you hang around. So I said, okay, if I'm going to hang around, then I need to be doing something. So with Lotus, really, it has become, I mean, there's things I've learned in my journey, and there's certain things I do well, and I feel I can bring to the table. So I was told that, all the new kids who come in, you can start kind of
mentoring them.
Yeah. So yeah, so it's not just that. So I'm right now working on a few things in the studio, really working out programs of looking at what learning could be within the context of the studio. I am, of course, continuing to work with the senior leadership, so my partners, all the principals, Siddharth, Ankur, Asha, Pankuri, who are now practically leading the studio, and I report to them. But I also then have now I have a supporting role in kind of bringing, being the compass. Maybe my gray and hair and balding head has some vestiges of wisdom, which I force and thrust down their throats sometimes. But yeah, so that's one role. And then I seeded an organization. We seeded an organization about 4 years ago because we were very frustrated designing for other people. And very often what we conceptualize, we do a lot of work in detail. We would detail out a lot of products, furniture, and a lot of it would get lost in translation in the making process, right? And Kulu, Arun Kulu, who's one of the people who heads Mangrove, was a part of Lotus for several years. And I think he wanted to really get into the domain of making. And that time there was another colleague, Vedika, and then Kulu's wife, Suman. I mean, actually, Kulu is a surname, so Suman Kulu and Suman Sharma, whatever. So they, she had a break from what she was doing, and I helped kind of seed that. And my experience in kind of building teams and really helping. So they're fantastic designers. I mean, they don't need any guidance in design and making, but they did kind of need guidance in conceptualizing the enterprise, the values of the enterprise, and again, what really moved us was the ability to have an enterprise where the divide between the maker, the carpenter and the artisan and the designer and the storekeeper. I mean, where again we created a flat system and we broke this notion of the blue collar and the white collar and somebody sitting on a computer and somebody being on the floor. So Kulu's on the floor, 14 hours a day, getting his hands dirty with the carpenters. The carpenters are sometimes in the design studios working with the designers, and the designers are out on the floor. And we are still a long way to go, but really what drove us was the spirit of innovation coming from the grassroots. I think that's what we believe in Lotus as well, that innovation is not top down. Innovation really happens at the level of doing, at the level of making, when you're doing things. So if we are able to create processes and a culture which allows people to contribute to the process of innovation, which is quite contrary to this kind of modernist top-down notion of this genius, and I mean, that the author of the idea is the guy at the top, and everyone else is just translating his vision. I think for us, from the beginning, the idea was to really, the role of the principal is to create a framework of questions, and to be editorial, and to be like an orchestrator, to be able to bring together all the various talents and skills that are available, including the contractor. I mean, we consider our contractors as our partners. A lot of them have grown along with us. We've seen them grow, and they are now, as accomplished, if not more, in certain ways, and we listen to them as a part of the process. So I think for us, this desire to really disappear, I mean, it sounds very esoteric, but I think one of the things, one of my core desires is to really disappear, that Ambrish disappears from Lotus, and the principles disappear as identities, as separate identities, which give us, that this is my way, and we are able to surrender ourselves so completely to the context of what we are doing. And context is not just whether it's in Rajasthan, Kerala, it's the context of where you are right now,
The localization.
No, it's not just that. It's also the client. It's also the contractor. It's also the guy at site working. It's what is happening right now. What is required? What are the parameters that you need to solve for? Let all of that come to the forefront, and whatever emerges as a solution, let it emerge. So we've gone to site on projects, and a lot of architects find this very disturbing, and I've been criticized. But there's a big project we did in Kangra, a big hotel which still hasn't, it got stopped because of some permission issues. But the entire project hit site, and we finished the structure. It was a 1 lakh square foot project without a set of elevational drawings. It was a process of emergence.
That's quite a feat.
Yeah, and it's not that it was that was done because of we had to do it quickly and all that. It was a deliberate attempt to allow the site and the prototyping and the emergence of the skill, whatever comes up, inform what comes up finally. I mean, that was, I think, a lesson we learned in Jodhpur as well when we did Raj Jodhpur. I mean, we had no clue about the skills that the guys there had, and what we'd be able to produce with them. And had we gone in with a predetermined idea of this is what we want, because that's what, so it's like if you have a hammer as a tool, then you go around looking for nails, right? So if you really want to kind of break that, and you want to experience something new each time, and that's how I believe we experience it. You go in with a set of parameters that you want to solve for. You go in with a set of solutions, a framework of solutions that will give the result that the client needs. So it might be a 5-star hotel, then he wants to be able to charge a certain ARR, and he wants to spend only so much money. So that stays as a constant. But what is it that's going to deliver on that is something that's a bit like a jazz piece, right? I mean, so you have a set of instruments, and you have a set of tools, but you allow what is happening to speak its own language. So you allow the poem to form, or you allow the building to emerge, or you allow the product to emerge from a series of processes. And our skill and a skill as a practitioner is really to be able to say at the right time that this is it, and no more. I think that's all it takes, because the work is actually happening. I mean, it's happening around you. You're applying yourself. You're letting it be. A lot of people are feeding into it. I mean, it sounds all very a little vague, maybe. I don't know.
No, but it is a collaborative and rather explorative process, right? And I saw this in the Baradari, and that's the reason I bring that up, is because that's something that I've studied closely and I've been there. But even there, in terms of the exploration of the material, the exploration of the processes, the people who are involved in the processes, that start to inform what it eventually turns into, right? And I think that kind of just seems to be what you do, that you're on this explorative journey. But tell me, if you weren't doing this, what would you be doing? Or if you were to disappear today from Studio Lotus, where would you find yourself?
So I think, so again, it's not literal. So the disappearing is happening day by day. So the disappearance from me is actually my own disappearance from myself. I mean, it's like my learning. By nature, I grew up, and because I was the survivor, right? I mean, I stopped taking money from my father at the age of 16, 17, whatever, and I would live off whatever I got from what I earned, and that was a big part of my deal in my head. And so I was a huge control freak. So I grew up in this space in my head that I had to control everything for things to work out. And my colleagues will vouch for that. My partners will vouch for that, and I think for me, my biggest learning right now is continuing to observe myself as I try and interfere in people's thinking, which prevents new things from emerging. So my only struggle, I mean, my constant struggle right now, and that's what I mean by disappearing. I need to be out of the way for something to emerge. All of us need to be out of the way for our lives to show up. The conversation we had the last time when we met. What prevents from our true purpose from showing up is us, because we are in the way. So I really believe that even as anyone as a practitioner, if you get out of the way with your likes and dislikes, and this is the way it ought to be, and this is the way it not ought to be, what you really seek and what you really deserve will come to you. And it does, and it is. And I see it every day. I see the miracles of what I just talking this morning, I have a coach who coaches me, and I was talking to him, and ever since I've stepped out of the way, so I formally stepped down as the CEO of Studio Lotus as of April 1, and that's not a first April joke. And it's really been amazing to see the emergence of my colleagues to the next level, and that only reaffirms that it's only I who's in the way, and this I with a quote unquote, and I think it's true for all of us, and that's really the journey.
It's really interesting the way you put it, because how I also see it, and this is also because we've been having various conversations, right, across the past few months, and you might consider yourself as somebody wanting to kind of step out of the way, but what you're also doing is, in order to facilitate somebody else's journey, and in order for them to realize what they need to move away, you also become that some sort of intervention, right? So there's this sort of dichotomous role that you end up playing, don't you?
So no, you're absolutely right. I think the closest analogy I can find is that is really I think the most powerful facilitators are those that help you see in a way actually what you already knew, and help you discover something that you were not being able to articulate for yourself.
So becoming a conduit of some sort.
Not even that, they're just a mirror, So, and a mirror needs to be a mirror has no presence. I mean, if you see what is a mirror doesn't exist. A mirror's sole role is the mirror on its own has no identity.
Break down the bound.
It has no identity, right? It only shows you, right? So to me, that's an ultimate, for me, that's an aspiration that if one were able to be in that space where you can just be there for the other person, to kind of be there 100% for that moment, for that person, for that context as a designer, for that piece of music. It doesn't matter really. And you asked me what would I be doing if I weren't a designer. It doesn't really matter. I could have been making boats. I could be a cook. I don't know. We often have that conversation in the studio, and one of the things we do this visioning exercises, and I think we gave up a few years ago because we realized, for us, there's nowhere to get to. Vision is always, we want to be this, we want to get there. We realize that it is the way we do, the way we are, the way we work, what we believe in, and the way we work together. That's that's fundamental to our practice. We could be making hamburgers. I mean, we could be making, I don't know, we could have a dhaba. We could be, it doesn't matter. It is who we are being that gives us who we are. We exist because of who we are as a collective, as a people, not for what we do. And yes, design is our tool, and we will do it as best as we can. So we give 100%. We are fiercely kind of driven, but that's part of a value. We would be fiercely driven if we were making chola bhaturas. We would be fiercely driven. We would want to be the best chola bhatura makers for the customers we have, whatever. So I'm saying that it's not a lack of, I think, purpose. It's more, we would put it wherever we direct ourselves, so yeah.
Great. I think we've got a bunch of questions coming in. So I'm going to just pull out a few right now, Ambrish. Just a second.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with, wow. Sorry, 1 second. We've got a lot of comments and a lot of admirers who are sharing very positive feedback. So I'm trying to look for a question. Okay. Oh, there's Ankit Tomar who wants to ask a question. If we can just unmute him on Zoom and have him speak with us.
Hi, Ambrish. It's really nice to hear you talk. I worked at Matra, so kind of joined everything from there, and it's amazing what they're doing. My question was, I would like to know your views on how spatial design will change after COVID-19, and how are you tackling with that?
You mean how will it change for us as a practice, or how will spatial design change as a whole?
Spatial design change as a whole, like.
I think design will change as much as society changes around us. Design, I don't think design can be seen in isolation. I'm not sure whether what we've been through has been strong enough to bring a change in consciousness in society. So to my mind, after some initial kind of dabbling with different ways of working, maybe some increased work from home, and some new ways of overcoming the economic drawback and the change in business, the kind of business that firms get. I think things will slowly, unfortunately, for the most part, will go back to exactly the way they were. I mean, not a very optimistic kind of scenario, I'm sorry, but that's my feeling. I think we haven't been through enough. We've not really, I mean, it's not really been a churning of that nature. Yes, people have been out of jobs. We are worried about where we'll pay our salaries from. But I don't think our worldview has shifted. So to that degree, I don't think, for most of us, I'm sure there are a few of us who will.
I think we appreciate it. We appreciate the change, and we've become aware of it. But whether that's going to be a long-lasting effect is something that we're just going to have to wait and watch and see if that actually happens. No? Okay, we have another question from Utkarsh. If we can just get him to share his thoughts with us. Is Utkarsh here? Utkarsh, if you can just unmute yourself and share your question. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll come back to Utkarsh. We've got Meru Basar, who wants to speak with Ambrish, and I believe has been a part of the Lotus team before.
Yes.
Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got Utkarsh.
Okay.
Hello?
Yes, Utkarsh, we can hear you.
Utkarsh, we can hear you.
Some issue with the audio. Can you hear me?
Yes, Utkarsh, we can hear you.
Hey, Ambrish, just want to know about your love affair with cycling. And I eventually want to disappear on your cycle.
Actually, it's one of those things that keeps me going. I like to challenge myself in different ways, and I got into cycling because of a couple of friends, and so I use that as one of my physical pastimes for my physical fitness. And and I enjoy it. I love it. I love being out on the road. I love the fact that you have to be really, really alert on Delhi roads. And
different kinds of challenges.
But I don't think for me it's really like I mean that's not really what's going to get me to disappear, if at all. Like that's not. Yeah.
Okay. We've got someone. So can we get Mehrur back?
No, I think they've left.
Okay, so the question was, what do you think is the role of design and architecture in addressing issues of equality and social justice? And if you have any pointers for practitioners of the trade and profession.
So, unfortunately, I don't have very kind of macro worldviews. I think equality and social equity will only be practiced to the degree that you or I practice it in our lives. And the industry, your opportunity to change anything in the industry will begin, or my opportunity to change anything in the industry will begin when my belief in the social equity begins to manifest itself in the manner I wish for it to be expressed. Until the time I have people working in my house at, I don't know, 10, 15, 20,000 rupees a month while I make X, or I see laborers on the sites that we designed for earning 1/100th of what we earn. If social equity means financial equity, that's not going to happen, right? I mean, why the first world exists is because of the third world. If there was no third world, there would be no first world. But to me, also that's not necessarily. To me, that's not a problem. To me, it doesn't bother me. I think where we can begin our journey is really in dignity and in respect. And if we can put aside whatever control we have on money or we don't have, and begin to relate to each person we come across, it doesn't matter whether they're the prime minister of a country or a laborer at site, and have the same degree of respect and listening and empathy and compassion for them. I mean, even if you can get to some semblance semblance of that, that would be a first step, I think.
Sorry, Ambrish, we seem to have lost the live stream. I'm just going to start that again.
I've just requested.
Okay.
You need to approve.
I have.
Yeah. Okay, so we're on.
Okay,
so
great.
Should I repeat that, or you think it went through? Or?
I think we probably lost that for the Instagram audience. If you can just quickly share that again.
What I was saying was that I don't think, I think policy changes and all of that will surely help. But I think fundamentally for each of us, it is changing our own worldview, and not just the worldview, in who we are being with people around us. Every moment being conscious and aware of that, and bringing the values we seek. So all of us seek dignity, all of us seek respect, all of us want to be listened to. And if we can bring just those values in every interaction that we have, and make that really like a living practice, I think you'll be well on your journey to contributing to that happening. I think that's all I can say. Yeah.
Okay. There are, interestingly, a number of questions that are coming up on both ends, on Zoom as well as Instagram. which pertain to the idea of practicing as an architect and not being trained as one. So I think the reason that there's a lot of interest in this is also because of the recent Supreme Court hearing and the whole COA issue that's been going on and has turned into a rather big controversy. But, you know, I'm an architect. I was trained as one, but I was trained in Canada. I don't have the license to practice in India, and that annoys me. I have my views on it. But you are practicing as a designer and with a design firm over here without necessarily having that stamp. How important do you think that is? Or, you know, what are your views on this?
I think, I mean, I don't really have a view. I think I have been, there have been people who have directly sent me messages, and I've got threats of having me locked up behind bars and
oh wow,
very names and for doing what I do. And I think there are two things. I think one is whether a degree in this country or anywhere ensures that you're qualified to practice. I mean, that to my mind is a very big question mark.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people here would know what I'm talking about, the way, the kind of places degrees are meted out, the manner, the process in which degrees are meted out. Are the people who come out from university, maybe a design education or architectural education, competent to go out there and build a building? Is a question that I would leave open. I mean, we are really talking of, and while we might be talking of architecture and design, but to me, that's really, it's a larger question on education, you know. Are we producing people who are fit to run the country? Are we producing doctors who heal? Are we producing, I don't know. I mean, it's a much larger question on whether any form of formal education at the moment ensures or is sufficient to ensure that what is required to practice, whatever you practice, those criteria have been met. So to that degree, I don't think so. Having said that, should there be codes? Yes, there ought to be. Should there be checks and balances? I'm all for it. I don't know whether the manner in which they're being enforced at the moment, or even looked at the moment, are more kind of insecure. I mean, the kind of issues that are coming up to me are more insecurity-based issues, rather than genuinely making sure there's good buildings being built out there. You know, if that's the question, that are we producing great cities? Are we producing great buildings? Are we producing good spaces? You know, and will ensuring the people who have degrees only do that? Will that solve for that? No, I don't think so. I'm happy to put it out there. But if that's the question, then I think it needs a different kind of questioning, you know.
So I'm going to pull in Viren over here, considering that he is a trained architect. He's been running his practice and he's taught before in university. So maybe he has something to add to this.
I'm very scared suddenly. I'm very scared of it.
My dear friend, first of all, let me thank all the participants. I think it's great that so many numbers have come, and he can't be scared because the numbers are for him. No, they are there because of Ambrish. It's wonderful to listen. I didn't know you from this side, to be honest with you. I didn't know this immense introspection that you have conducted over so many decades, and the aspiration that you have on this journey for yourself. I mean, it touches me. It touches me very strongly, and I feel I'm myself on that path. Now, the biggest thing what you said, I think that's the most challenging and the most difficult thing for human species in general, and for creative people, of course, very difficult, is to leave behind control. So my question is, because leaving control has enabled you to create this collaborative model, Lotus. I think leaving control is such an essential thing to open up the creativity of a community of people. Now, did this happen in your practice after you succeeded, or did success come because you left the control?
Ambrish, before you answer, I'm just going to repeat this question for the benefit of our audience on Instagram because they couldn't hear it.
Yeah.
And Viren, correct me if I'm wrong. Viren is asking Ambrish about the idea of control, and he wants to know whether, I think I'm going to totally make this wrong, but
No.
whether
Carry on.
this control, leaving this control came after the practice or before?
No.
After
So
the
I think
success.
I'll repeat the question.
You got
I'll
it.
repeat
Yes,
the
yes.
question.
Ambrish, you go ahead because I'm getting
So I'll just paraphrase phrase the question. So what you said, Viren, was like, if you really want to see something emerge and flower around you, then letting go is a very important part of that. And did this letting go happen for me before the success of the practice or after the success of the practice? Yeah.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay. So the first, I think, thing we need to be clear about is depends on how we are defining success. For me, the first point of success of the practice was when we were able to produce good work and make a living from it, right? So that stage when we ended up doing the first VR store or the bar or the Khaja Chowk or whatever, to me, that was really the turning point for the practice. After which there was a steady stream of work. Our work started getting published. I mean, we started being able to be a sustainable design practice, reasonably well known. That's very important. It was important for us at that time because that's what keeps the work coming in. So no, so this at that time it was very, very controlled. I mean, for several years it was very, very controlled, and I think the turning point wherein was when, you know, what we would see is that people would come into the studio, work for a year and a half, and then just disappear. You know, sometimes you have people just coming to work one day and not come the next day, and we wouldn't know, you know, what happened, like where did they go? And then we would have the regular stories. आजकल के बच्चे ऐसे हैं, हम तो ऐसे नहीं होते थे, ज़माना बदल गया है, you know, people are no longer sincere and this and that. And I think it is one of my clients at the time who held up a mirror, really, and that I'm really grateful to him for having done that, saying, what is the most important thing for you in your practice? So he said, you can have 3 focuses or 2 or 3 focuses. One is that you are focusing on your project and the product, and you're all totally consumed by what goes out there, how it's perceived, etc. The second is you could be, I mean, actually before that is you could be that you want to make money, which for us was never, I mean, otherwise we wouldn't have been designers and architects, so that anyway goes out of the window. So it was this, or then because my tremendous frustration was that we would invest so much in people who would join and then they would leave. And I'm sure it's a common problem that all of us face. I mean, it's not anything new. And I think he asked me, and I think I had the good fortune to be able to be candid to myself and to him. And he said, who is your team for you? Who are these people who work in the studio? And I said, they are the team that help our ideas come to life, you know. And he said, so you've given the reason yourself. They exist for you to be able to translate what you think of. So you're using them. You don't really care about them. And you know, I've always been a very compassionate person, very empathetic, very da-da-da. So I got very offended initially. I said, no, but I talk to them. So, I mean, I really give them respect and all that. But I think, you know, Viren, after a couple of weeks and some real introspection, I found what he said was true, that people were only a tool at that time for me to enable what vision I had for a project. There was no room for them to be co-author. So, this word collaborative is very misused. So this collaboration, people sitting around a table and doing something, is not necessarily collaboration. I think collaboration is a way of being. How much of the other person are you allowing, are you giving space to be a co-author to a point where nobody really knows who the author is, and I think that realization, and that was midway through the practice. I would say that happened about 8-9 years ago, I think, for us, where we began to see that what would bring us fulfillment, and it was really about personal fulfillment, was to see people grow and see the organization grow through people as they grew with us. And we don't have, in our studio, all our computers have pen drive, whatever, USB ports,
access. Yeah.
People, everyone has internet. Everyone. I mean, we realize that if we really want to be who we are, who we say we want to be, then we have to live that way, and we really began to invest in people, and it's very difficult, Viren, because you would know that your projects are of such quality and so much attention to detail, and we also try and get close to that. And there is a very thin line between letting go and continuing to moderate. So it's like you don't let go, you are walking along, so you're walking along each person in their journey, making sure that as things drop or don't, they're pushed in. So it's very taxing. You have to allow for mistakes to happen. You have to allow for the right mistakes to happen, but not the wrong kind. How much are you willing to? So it's a huge opportunity for anyone in a leadership position to encounter daily challenges, and we have seen dips in quality in certain projects and then going up and down, and that's been part of our learning and part of the collective journey. So it's like, and the analogy I use, and most parents here would really understand that, is when you have a child with you and you're doing something with them and you want them to learn, at a certain point you let go, but you're with them, so when they're learning cycling, right? I mean, you don't think they're slowing me down if you're going to ride together. They are going to slow you cycle with them, right? But at that time, it's not costing, they're slowing me down, I could cycle faster on my own, or I could swim better on my own, because you're committed to their growth as much as you are to the end result. So I don't think there's a straight answer to this, but I think it somewhat works like that. I don't know if it's answered your query, Viren.
I think just to add to it, I think it shows in your case an immense amount of course, trust in people, but an immense amount of love also. The analogy that you gave just now about your child, that the child is cycling along with you, but you don't think that moment of fear, you have no fear with you. You don't even think of moving faster, but your attention is completely on your child. That means there is a kind of love that you are expressing that very moment. And I think what I hear from you through what you are saying, and your larger vision of disappearing has to do a lot with love. That's what I can say.
So it's really nice that you picked up on that, Viren. And one of the values, we've got a set of values that we put out there, and the one we most believe in, and the one that sums up all our values is love. And that in the end, when you can't figure things out, the only beacon, only compass you turn to is love. And that if you can leave the space with love, then everything will be fine. So no, thank you for bringing that up.
Okay, I think we're having a little bit of a trouble with the Insta Live account because when we get questions on Zoom, the Instagram audience can't hear us. But I hope they got the gist of the last conversation between Ambrish, you and Viren. If there are any questions, we can take them now. I've been getting questions. This is something that I wanted to ask you as well, Ambrish, is that you're a voracious reader, and I know that you've been reading all sorts of books, and this is something that somebody else touched upon as well. If you would have any recommendations for books that they could read to improve themselves or their practice.
Okay. I just read all kinds of books, and I think it would be very, you'll have to be very specific about what you'd want to improve. I don't know. I don't think I can suggest, I'm in no position to suggest or advise. I can tell you some of the books that have profoundly influenced me. And I don't know whether they've influenced the practice as much, but I think the Tibetan book of living and dying has had a profound influence on me. The Bhagavad Gita has had a profound influence on me. A lot of Werner Erhard's work, the work he's done with EST and the Landmark Forum, and otherwise his writings have had a very profound influence on me. Then the Mahatma Gandhi's autobiography has been hugely transformational. The earliest book, the first book that really set me up on this journey was something that my dear friend Vineet, who's also on this call somewhere, my earliest childhood friend, who him and I, we read it together, was The Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. That really helped me overcome, really be present to the moment and overcome the fear of opening things up and understanding the world, deconstructing the world. So really these are the books that have most profoundly influenced me. The Timeless Way of Building and Pattern Language by Christopher Alexander have been, I think in the field of architecture, they've really, really been transformational. For me, The Architecture of Happiness has been something I read with a lot of joy and delight. Those are some of the books.
Someone's asking, what are you currently reading? I think it was Tracy. I'm not sure. On Instagram, someone just asked.
It's I'm actually reading. I'm rereading the essence of the Bhagavad Gita, and that is also because of a project I'm working on. So I'm really deeply enmeshed in that, and I'm reading The Kite Runner for the second time, and I'm reading it for the second time because I'm reading it out as bedtime reading to my twin boys every night. So we do 10, 15 pages, and I'm loving it. The Kite Runner is beautiful. Yeah.
Lovely. We do have a couple of questions that have come in about adaptive reuse in design, and also the sort of, I guess the context to this would be that Studiolotus has been, in the last, almost two decades of Studiolotus, you guys have got a lot of international recognition as well. There have been a lot of awards, a lot of competitions. You yourself have been, on the jury of international awards and panels, whether it was the World Architecture Festival or recently Design. And you've had this sort of, you've had the opportunity to interact with and to also observe a lot of international architecture and design. So where do you feel today Indian design and architecture stands in relation to what is happening globally? And what is it that, are we at par with them? Are we not? If not, why? So where is it? Where does Indian design stand today in, at a global level?
So this is not specific to adaptive reuse.
Somebody is asked about adaptive reuse. So the question from Ram is why adaptive reuse is not evident and visible in Indian architectural practices like in the West. Is it because we don't value the past like them?
Okay, so...
And separately, people were talking about the idea of where Indian design stands in relation to what's happening globally.
So I think I'll answer the adaptive reuse question first, and then maybe the larger question on Indian design. And I think adaptive reuse is I mean, if you really look at the literal translation of the word, it's reusing existing spaces. And so there is two kinds of adaptive reuse. There's adaptive reuse in the romantic notion of the word, where we see beautiful historic spaces, often with contemporary inserts. I mean, in the West, when we talk about it, that's really the image we have. And there is, of course, the restoration and conservation bit. So I think that in India, I'd like to believe that there's this idea of a living heritage for us. I mean, if you go to Mehrauli and the way people live, I think they're living in the middle of history. And because it's so close to us and it's a continuum, I mean, there's no clean break from it. I don't think we value it as something from the past. For us, it's something that's just been a part of our everyday life. And to that degree, for the vast majority of the population that's dealing with their everyday survival and their everyday existence, the idea of history is very far-fetched. You know, when somebody's kind of hungry and somebody's right now in survival mode, the idea of history, of something from the past, doesn't stay as relevant, especially if it's been there with them all along. It's not something exotic. It's not something we need to travel to. Most of us have something historic an arm's length away from us. And to that degree, I think we as a society, I mean, that's why very few of us go to museums, or because for us, we've grown up with stories of the past and with living heritage. Like today, even today, if you drive 300 kilometers out of a big city, even now, you'll find people living in a way that people were living maybe 50 years ago, 100 years ago, right there, right? And so there's this coexistence. So to that degree, I don't think there is this exoticization of the past. And there's so much of it, you know. I mean, I've been to Orcha so many times, and it has no visitors. And any one square 100 meter by 100 meter section of Orcha is as rich as Angkor Wat, you know, or an entire section of the old city in Barcelona or anywhere else. But we have so much of it, and that I think it's lost. It's lost relevance. And because the second thing is the way we've moved as a society. I think, unfortunately, the choice we made post-independence of following the route of industrialization and the Industrial Revolution versus a more homegrown, I would say, model of society, which Gandhi was advocating, which today, of course, seems the only solution that the planet has of surviving, but which we rejected. That moved our focus away from what we have. So when I talk of heritage, I don't only speak of buildings. I think what's even more important is the repository of skill that we have. You know, that mason who still knows how to carve stone and timber and beat metal and make utensils with brass and so on and so on. I mean, I don't even need to say it. All of you know what I'm talking about. And those people are living heritage, and we don't really care about that, even though it's right there available to us. And that's an area, I mean, for us we've been very passionate about that, because we see it as an opportunity that exists right here, right now. And even that doesn't figure very much, because our aspirations, our patronage, whether it's from the government, whether it's from a private clientele, whether it's from the businesses, comes from a worldview that's Western. And that leads me to the second question, that are we as good as the West? Is the West good? What do we mean by good? Do we produce buildings that are as slick and function or engineered as well? No, we don't. Is that the only measure of good? I don't know. Is that what we should be aspiring to? I'm not sure. I think what we need, I would frame it a different way. I think we've grown up in a society which has a very unique way of generating solutions, which is really more emergent. I mean, people like using this word jugaad. I think it demeans it demeans the process. Jugaad means improvisation on the spur of the moment without thinking, just patchwork. I really think we are a society of tremendous sensitivity and resourcefulness and improvisation and frugality. And I think those solutions have existed around us. And I think if we are really to develop a vocabulary that holds its own, and that's, I would say, looked upon by the West as a way forward, I think we need to move away from looking westwards as a model and creating our own vocabulary of solutions that are appropriate for the kind of society we live in, where we have several hundred thousands. It's cheaper even today. It's as cheap to build a building by hand, if it's done with the right processes, as it is to build it mechanically. You don't get the same slickness, but you get something else. You have the opportunity to do something else. Are we looking at that? We've done very large as in 3 lakh, 4 lakh square feet process, where we've tried to create hybrids of pre-engineering and handwork. And the only reason there, I'm not saying we've figured out solutions, but I think we need to come up with a paradigm that emerges from within what our context. And yes, there's something to learn from engineering and technology, but that's a specific learning. Whether the model, does that mean that we have to build buildings the way people do in the West? Will we be as good after that happens? I don't think so. I don't think that's even a question we need to address. And we have to come up with our own set of parameters, our own measures, our own benchmarks, and a confidence that comes from knowing yourself and being, some solutions coming up from within our own kind of domains. And there are people working in that space very beautifully. So there is a lot to learn within the country, I think.
And would you have a comment on, sorry, I think Viren wants to ask a question. Yes.
Can I just add to this what Ambrish said? Can I take the liberty to gate crash? Yeah, I know that. I put.
Viren, can you speak up a little bit so that our Instagram audience can hear you as well?
What should I should introduce myself?
No, just
speak up louder.
Louder, okay. I feel what Ambrish is touching here, initiated by this question about looking at our history and the past, is, I think, touching a very profound and very present, a very urgent question. Question is actually about ethos, not work ethos, a cultural ethos and the ethics related to it. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Ambrish, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. I had that few days back, this strange idea that in India we still refer a lot to philosophers of the West. I mean, people take pride in having chewed Heidegger or say Schopenhauer, and then maybe if you go a little further into the past, and Germans are certainly very strong on that, you have Immanuel Kant. So you derive your work ethos through the reading of say these philosophers. And I think Europeans have a very strong tradition, say starting from the Greek culture down, say, to the Germans, and then further, say, the French philosophers, into understanding their cultural values, in understanding of themselves. As against, and I think is beautiful what Ambrish touched upon, what if we look at our culture and the resource? And in my opinion, the resource in Indian culture are not philosophers. They are gurus. They are, without, unfortunately, in recent time, there is an orange color to these gurus, but say we drop this idea of the colors. But I feel that using the gurus as the source, as the pool for driving the work ethos, for establishing a work ethos, is very essential. And we have it next door. The problem is we don't recognize them. We don't recognize the gurus as our mentors, because in recent times, these gurus have been, unfortunately, polarized. The situation is no more what it should be, what it ought to be. Instead, there is the distance that we are creating with our own culture by polarizing the situation, by saying that our own philosophy is going through a troubled times. The term that Ambrish dropped, and I feel that is so deeply rooted in our culture and doesn't exist in the philosophy. It exists in the religions, but never in the philosophy, is compassion. Compassion is such a strong term. And I think if I look at the future change, which Ambrish hinted at, it is actually driven by that very thing, by compassion. I just wanted to add to that what he mentioned in it as one of his key, not aspiration, it's more that his key livelihood. That's how I see that. Okay, I wanted to.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're going to take just a couple more questions.
We've got one from Kanishk of Design Daftar. Kanishk, could you share your question with us, please? Is Kanishk around?
Hello.
Yep. Yeah, hi.
Yeah.
Kanishk.
Yeah. Hi,
Hi,
Ambrish.
Krish, I'm going to request you to
Hi.
speak up a little bit, please.
Am I audible to everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Ambrish. Hi,
Hi.
Vrin. Hi, Mrinalini.
Hi.
So it's just been really interesting to see how you've been talking about how you come from a non-conventional background and you don't have a formal grounding in architecture. Us architects, we always love to talk about how there are two components to our work. One is the artistic, one is the more technical. And I've come across, say, for instance, your Krishi Bhavan project in Orissa, where you've designed this most evocative elevation, and you've almost thought of the facade as being an independent element other than the building. I would just like to know from you if you could sort of just briefly talk us through how you thought about, how you engage with the building part of it. So one gets that you've been able to take a narrative like you've been mentioning from, say, fabric design and textile to do the elevation, but then how would you engage with the more mundane technical aspect of the building? And you did mention some of that in the sense that you're experimenting with pre-engineering or whatever. I would just like to know if you could elaborate a little on that and how you think of it coming from a non-conventional space and more from a doer's perspective than sort of a conventional architect's perspective. How do you look at building and how do you conceive building?
Sure. Thanks for asking that. Yeah. So I will. So I'll just repeat the question for our Instagram viewers. So I'm sorry, I didn't get your name.
Kanishk.
Kanishk from Design Daftar. He's asked me specifically that while, say, in a project like Krishi Bhavan, there's a very evocative facade which is derived from the textiles, and that the narrative is quite evident there. But on all the other aspects of the building, starting, on the more relatively mundane and technical aspects of the building, how do they get addressed, and how do we do that in projects? And maybe I'll do that with respect to Krishi Bhavan, so it would establish, it'll be easier to work with one example. Kanishk, is that okay with you? Yeah. So actually, what you see, in fact, for the longest time, I was very, I would say, I didn't even want us to kind of show the images of the facade because we were worried that the building will become about the facade, which is what it's done actually, and that's not what the building is about. The primary, role of the building, and it's in a government precinct, is to go back to Königsberger's master plan for the Secretariat area, which he had conceived of because it was in this new, very green part of the city, and Cuttack was immensely kind of populated and very dense, was to give to the city a set of lungs which would become available to the citizens post 5 o'clock. So it was this beautiful idea of creating a precinct where this entire infrastructure, that beautiful infrastructure that's created, becomes a repository for the city to engage with, right? What happened with governance and the way buildings were designed subsequently with this idea of security and walling things in and locking everything, actually it became quite the contrary. So the nicest part of the city would open at 9 o'clock, shut at 5 o'clock and become dead. So that was a starting point. So from a master planning perspective, one of the first gestures we did was go back to Königsberger's master plan and create a building. It's a very simple gesture. It's been done several times. We turned the idea of security on its head. We said, look, you only need your offices locked and sealed, and the other facilities that we create. So what was very visionary, I think, about the brief was that the clients wanted to create a facility not only for the Directorate of Agriculture, but also for the farmers. So we extended that facility to be available for the rest of the city. So we said, what if we elevate all the offices off the stilt and open up the entire stilt area to the street and let the building breathe and stay alive from early morning to late at night. So all the facilities we create, there's a gallery, there's open stilted areas for hearts, there is an auditorium, there was meant to be an amphitheater, there's some demonstration agricultural spaces, there are gardens. So the entire building can't be locked at the stilt level, and the building is designed to be accessed at all times and available to the city, really. So that was our first gesture from a planning perspective. The second gesture was really how to create a building. So we did a lot of study on what they were doing with the new buildings and what was present in the old buildings. And what we found is a lot of the existing buildings were not naturally ventilated by design. They just didn't have the budgets or the energy to air condition all the government buildings. So they were normal, ordinary buildings that were at some stage meant to be naturally ventilated, that had been boarded up with plywood, with cupboards, etc. Because of dust coming in. And people were say 60 to 70% of this department that we worked for were sitting in non-air conditioned areas, but that were completely non-ventilated either. And it was actually almost inhuman, the conditions they were living in. And on the other extreme, their aspirations for all new offices was to have them centrally air conditioned. And now when you do a larger mapping of the amount of footprint required for all the offices, and if you were to centrally air condition all of those, the kind of heat island effect it would create and the kind of energy required the city didn't have. So what we wanted to create was a model that showed how passive cooling in a tropical climate could actually be a very, very viable, comfortable solution, alternative to this. So 70 to 80% of the building is passively cooled and naturally ventilated through a night purging system. So the entire building works, has a very high thermal mass, and it has this ability to basically post 5 o'clock, when the temperature falls and there's a 10 to 12 degree drop in temperature, there's cool air that flushes through the building and keeps getting flushed in through the building all night. It cools down the walls, the furniture, the partitions, and come 9 o'clock, 9:30, 10, when the temperature starts to rise, the vents close and the fans come on. So all the office spaces are fans, and then they start to cool down the building, and they get temperatures inside which are a good 9 to 10 degrees lower than what's outside. So when it's 41 degrees outside at peak, summer, it's 31 degrees outside and with fans, it's very comfortable because people are dressed appropriately. So that was the second part. The third part was we wanted to show a model that could be built by PWD, that the equivalent, by local kind of contractors, using materials that are easily accessible, that didn't require centralized sourcing from large, aluminum sheets and triple glazing, so where costs could be low, and yet create something that's, to our mind, a model of contemporary Odisha. So that's when the layer of craft of local material, and hence the louvers, the baffles that shade all the glazing came in. Now, when we made the baffles that shade the glazing, we could have made them in plain brick, or we could have given them a story. So we chose to give it a story. So actually, the building didn't start with an idea of the tapestry. The idea of the tapestry emerged at a much later stage, after the initial conceptualization and the planning of the building, and even this idea of the louvers was more or less kind of worked out. So it wasn't this big idea of doing this ikat building. That happens to be the most visually evocative kind of expression, and I don't think it's a big deal really. It's that's really, it's unfortunately that's what you see the most. Your photographs capture, and it is beautiful, and I'm not complaining, but it's not really the purpose of the building.
It's interesting that you bring that up. We were having a conversation recently with Viren, and we were talking about the idea of architecture versus interior design, which is a much longer debate. But Viren said, I think someone said to him recently, is that at the end of the day, architecture is something, or the building from the outside is something that somebody looks at only for a couple of seconds, but it's actually what you walk into, and you start to experience the space that eventually affects you. And if I'm not wrong, I have read this about, and I think I will paraphrase what I read about you having said this in the past as well, is that you've never seen a building and said, oh my God, wow, that affects me. But for you, what is more provocative, or is something that actually kind of, speaks to you, is the space inside. Or the experience inside.
Yeah, I don't know. Yes and no. I'm not at all, I think, bringing down the value of having beautiful looking buildings as an essential part of our environment, of our visual built environment. I think it's critical, and it is really what energizes a city and makes it a joy to walk in. Whether that is, what I end up finding in a lot of discourse is that's the starting point. A lot of practitioners who come and work within the studio, when we start off, they start with this idea of the elevation, and then they work backwards, saying, for me to get that, what do I need to fit in? And to me that is kind of somewhat inauthentic. I think that is really your desire to put your stamp rather than solving for a set of very complex parameters, which I think primary amongst those are the process by which it will get built, the efficiency with which it will get built, who all will be engaged, how will they build, how will it affect lives, how will it affect the environment. It's really like a complex web. And if you start with that, which is what unfortunately a lot of our contemporary practice forces us to do, because that's what gets published and that's what gets the maximum amount of visibility, it does become about that. And to me, that is shortchanging the role of architecture, architects, and what we ought to be looking at in much greater depth.
Yeah, I think, we've kind of really exceeded the time that we had anticipated for this conversation, and I know that we can go on forever, but I think we're going to wrap this up now, and I want to thank Ambrish for joining us today. Thank you all on Instagram and on Zoom. Ambrish, any sort of last words for us today? And then I'm going to invite Viren to kind of close the session.
I am just very thrilled to see a lot of familiar faces on the call who I haven't spoken to in ages. Edmund, my friend Vineet, my mama Rajan, Rohit. A lot of names out there who I might have missed.
We have actually missed a lot of questions and a lot of
Vivek,
comments.
I'm really sorry you've been asking a lot of questions. I'm just looking at the chat, and Vivek has asked some 20 questions, which
I seem to have missed that.
Yeah, Vivek, really sorry about that, man. And yeah, and I know it's been, thank you, Mrinalini. It's been, it's taken me back down memory lane, and it's been very, I think I've spoken about a lot of things I've not spoken about in several years, and especially I think talking about my father. I lost my father 7, 8 years ago in an accident, and I think I've relived in this conversation. I've relived my time with him and how much he meant to me, and thank you for allowing that to happen.
Of course, we're glad.
Yeah, and thank you for all of you for being patient listeners and for all the great questions. Thank you, Viren, for making this happen.
For all the questions that haven't been answered, we apologize. We have some restrictions on time, and I'm going to take the liberty on behalf of Ambrish to say, please reach out to him directly.
I'm really bad on social media. Yeah, but you could message on the Studio Lotus account. I have a very able team of colleagues who handle all that. I really am very bad on my own social media. Whatever you would have seen, I just don't.
I will vouch for the colleagues. Yes, they are very, very efficient. So please do forward your questions to Studio Lotus's handle on Instagram on different things. Viren, would you like to share some thoughts with us?
Yep. Let me, because there are few people who have messaged me meanwhile. First of all, a special thanks to all the audience who have taken their time off. I know it's Corona, so our schedules, daily schedules, are not as tight as Ambrish's. Ambrish is still flexing his muscles. I'm glad to see that. Very envious about his picture that he put up. A special thanks to Edmund from my side, because I am very sure he must have taken off from all his commitments to listen to Ambrish. I'm really glad. And of course, to the others. The idea behind, like in the introduction, Mrinalini said, the idea behind this series is not to talk only about architecture, but we can do that. We can do that. Like the last question was straight away hitting at a project. But the idea is generally to talk about things that normally you are shy, very often shy in person, say at the India Arbitrage Center, to ask directly, or very often these questions don't emerge when you listen to a speaker. They do emerge. It happens to me regularly. I listen to somebody. Once I leave the auditorium, suddenly I have all the questions and there's nobody to answer them. Happens to me regularly. I'm very sure I'm not alone in this. Especially with younger crowd. With younger crowd, I think this reality now, this new reality, helps actually to ask candidly questions, because we have to reach out to young people. Young people have other struggles all the time. Those who have already got into a certain ritual have it certainly easier, I would say a little easier. Their orientation is already set. So the idea behind this forum, therefore, is to ask also people if they know people they would like to invite to speak about a particular subject, or to speak generally about their life, if it is engaging, of course, like we heard from Ambrish. And if there is a certain wisdom that can be shared then with the larger audience. So we hope to have, and Mrinalini, myself, we have discussed about it. We hope to have more creative people, not only architects. She has a friend in Canada who is engaged in doing work with laces, with threads, sculptures with threads, with ropes, dyeing them, and so on and so forth. I have a friend in Germany who is a pianist but an architect, and I want to invite him to play also live for us. He's rehearsing nowadays. Then we have people who are into yoga, into meditation, maybe speak to us also during this time of lockdown. Maybe they can advise some of us how to handle our maybe more free time. So this forum is not a kind of singular track down forum. Please feel free to give your suggestions to Lotus this time. It can go directly to Mrinalini. It can go directly to Matra, Insta. We would listen to it. We will organize ourselves accordingly. As such, we have tried to keep it every Friday. I think a certain discipline is required. If we keep it at 4 o'clock, maybe after lockdown, we could change the timing because everybody will be in the office. We could take the timing to a later hour to allow more audience to come in. I think those adjustments, of course, we should be able to do. That's what I think. More will happen now between the friends. I am very sure many must be dying to give each other a big hug after seeing them many after many, many years, but unfortunately we can't do it. We shouldn't do it right now. And so hope you have a nice evening. Maybe somebody, Mrinalini, you would like to add something to this?
I'm actually just going to, for
the benefit of our Instagram audience, I'm just going to repeat some very salient points that you made, Viren. First of all, what Viren is saying is that, like we mentioned earlier, the idea of these conversations is to get behind the scenes, to actually get into the person's head and to understand the personal journey that informs their practice. And we are actually seeking out people who have extraordinary journeys to share. They don't necessarily have to be architects or designers, but anybody. Viren has a friend who is an architect, but is now practicing the piano about four hours a day in lockdown. And we are going to get him to share his story with us. We're looking at people of a creative bent of mind who can do this, who we can have these conversations with. So if anybody has suggestions, please feel free to suggest people and candidates. You can message me directly on social media. You can message the Matra handle on social media or email us either way. And we're probably going to be doing this every Friday at about 4 p.m. So as and when our conversations keep getting finalized, we'll keep posting it online and sharing the information with everyone. So just to kind of close today's conversation, and I know that these kind of chats can never really come to a close. We are constantly getting messages. We're still getting messages and questions on both platforms, on Zoom and Instagram. And I'm sure these conversations can continue. But for tonight, I think we're going to bring this to a close. And I would just like to thank everybody on, firstly, of course, Ambrish, for your time, your effort, and for being so candid and being honest. I think that's what's really important. And I think that's been heartening to have that honest conversation and to be able to talk about things that we don't necessarily do. You know, it's easy to look to Google design studios. It's easy to look up to find information about projects, and you read them in various platforms all the time. But to actually see the story that goes behind each of these things and to understand the people and what is it that makes those people create what they create, I think that is what is most intriguing, at least for me. And it's been an absolutely fabulous conversation with you, Ambrish. Thank you for that. Thank you, Matra, for facilitating this process. And we hope to have a lot more conversations, many more interesting people that we can get to know better. So till next time.
Thank you, Mrinalini. Thank you all.
Much. Okay. Bye. I'm going to stop everything now.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Great.